WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisCI to 44321.
Scott Walker of Prairie to Chien is a Democratic candidate in the 49th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Scott Walker, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for participating in this candidate interview. We'll start with asking you, what is your campaign's key message? Why are you running for this office?
To restore civility. It's about respect for one another, respect for all our citizens.
Well, given that, what's an example of a bill that would be a priority for you to introduce if you're elected?
It's up to me. The first bill would be to establish Roe v. Wade as the law of the land in Wisconsin and respect a woman's right to choose for her health care needs.
So if you're elected, you'll be entering the Assembly during a biennial budget year, and the state is projected to have more than a $3 billion surplus. What would you consider to be your top two priorities for use of that surplus funding?
Fully fund our public schools, number one. We have too many districts that have to go to the ballot for operating levies, and that's not right. My reading of the Constitution of Wisconsin says that the state is obliged to provide an elementary and secondary education for all its citizens.
Do you have another priority use for the surplus?
I do. I want to see the 49th District build a corn mill, a 100-ton per day corn mill to produce the masa flour that chip factories in Wisconsin use to make snack chips.
So you're talking about some spending priorities for the surplus funding. Some candidates are also prioritizing taxes, either tax cuts or tax reform. Are taxes part of your platform at all?
I would love to establish a wealth tax in the state. I don't think it's going to happen. But our revenue side is pretty well established, and as you said, we've got a budget surplus, meaning we don't have to stretch and scrape for sources right now. There are additional sources of revenue that would be easy to access. We can take the Medicaid expansion funds and expand our Badger Care program. We could legalize, regulate, and tax marijuana and take in millions of dollars that way. So I don't think there's any big consternation about the revenue side of Wisconsin's budget this year. The disagreements are going to be on the spending side.
You mentioned K-12 education as a priority for you, and that would be a priority for spending. What do you think is going well in K-12 education, or maybe what needs to be changed?
You know, we have some marvelous new schools. We know how to build a 21st century classroom, and that's remarkable. We should build on that. Many of the townships in my district have lost population recently, and they're struggling to operate their schools with reduced revenue. And they've come up with some interesting, creative things that might be copied statewide.
Do you have an example of that?
Well, we have a couple schools sharing an art teacher. Okay, if we're only going to have art one semester a year, well, that's going to work.
Okay. Moving on to higher ed. What does the future of Wisconsin's higher education system, four-year colleges, two-year colleges, the technical colleges, what does that look like to you, and where should the legislature be focusing?
I saw a report that the legislature is going to be asked about the question of separating UW-Madison from the rest of the system. I think that's a bad idea. I think that our obligation to provide education for our citizens would have us serving them all in the same room. I think our high schools are at the brink of a wonderful expansion where, in addition to our college-oriented tracks, we're going to prepare more people for trade schools. That'll make us more financially secure and able to rely on our local resources.
Do you see higher ed as a spending priority? Does there need to be additional funding in that area?
It does. It's shameful that the burden on students is so high right now. I think that in the long run, it's not going to happen next year, but in the long run, the state needs to be more than a 50% stakeholder in the cost of higher education.
Moving on to workforce, what do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how do you propose addressing this?
We have a large agricultural base, and it's hard to expand the base of agriculture. You don't want to employ more workers than you need there. You don't want to grow more food than you can sell. But we can be creative and find new markets for what we do produce. For example, the field corn that we grow right now would work well in a corn mill.
Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy, and this also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
Some form of that, yes. I think that we can't slow down construction because the skilled trades aren't available in the state. If we have to bring somebody in, we will. But I think it's to our advantage to grow those skills in Wisconsin so we can take care of our own system.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this, and what do you think should be done about it?
I'm very much aware of it. I think it's an abhorrent process. It's simply gaming the system. When somebody works for somebody else, they're employed. I think this contractor shenanigans is nonsense. It doesn't help us regulate quality control, and that's part of the important process, the hiring process. We want to get reliable people who know their skills so we can build good infrastructure. We want to be able to do that with Wisconsin labor.
Moving on to housing, affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. Some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and which best addresses rental housing affordability? Is it rent control or building more rentals or other?
Yes, it's a supply problem. Part of the supply problem can be managed by allocating how our housing is used. In Prairie to Chien, we have close to 25% of our housing stock owned as second homes, summer homes for people. Makes it very difficult for a young family to get a starter home when they're being outbid by VRBO. So there are things we could do with the tax code to allow cities and towns to tax seasonally occupied homes at a higher rate, make that a less attractive business venture, and hopefully put some of those homes back on the market for starter families. We also need to build more homes. And Wisconsin does not have the best history of planning for housing development that way. There's an old joke that concludes with, when we see good farmland, we build homes. But we do need more housing stock. We've got to be careful where we put it.
Transitioning to healthcare, medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
I think it's first important to distinguish between the healthcare system and the healthcare finance system. Our healthcare system is strained, especially in the rural areas. We barely have the capacity to meet our needs, and in fact, OBGYN is a hard-to-find specialty in the region. So we've got to make it more attractive for providers to work in the underserved areas. We can do that with financial incentives, or we can do it by expanding training programs to have trainees spend some time in these rural areas and get to know what the job is like. As for healthcare finance, it is absolutely essential that we expand Badger Care as soon as possible. We're experiencing 1,000 to 2,000 premature deaths per year that would be preventable if people had health insurance and sought care in a timely way.
Mental health care is also a growing concern for Wisconsinites and concern for state and county budgets. In your district, what are you hearing on this issue, and how would you address mental health care?
There are many mental health patients who are without care right now. Care is in short supply. It tends to be located in the cities and just a couple of big cities around the state. I've been saying recently that as a start, we need a sober house in every county seat in the state. We don't have that. But sometimes people, especially dual diagnosis, alcoholism and mental health issues, are in crisis simply because they've been drinking. If we had a place where they could sober up, they probably wouldn't need to tax that already strained mental health system. But we don't have that. We go directly to police, transport to a accepting system, and try to pick up the pieces from there. We put ourselves behind the 8 ball that way.
Abortion policy, you mentioned this as a priority for you. How should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
Well, I think that we have to codify Roe v. Wade into law in Wisconsin. Roe v. Wade is not the perfect solution, but it's one that the majority can agree on, and we've gotten along with it for the past 52 years. And I think that for stability in our social structure, we need to put that into law.
Transportation. What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of our aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
Transportation is a wide-ranging subject. I was just complimenting our Southwest CAP for their work in transporting people who are underserved. But rural areas don't have the transport to services that we need. I think the best solution would be bring the services closer to the people because transportation is carbon intensive right now. Someplace like Milwaukee is going to have different transportation needs where the problem seems to be to get rid of a freeway, not add one. There are many areas where studies required. Fortunately, we have the infrastructure revenue to make some changes. It's just a matter of, as a group politic, deciding what we're going to do.
The environment, PFAS, and other water contaminants are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how would you propose to address it?
It was probably my recognition of the combination of PFAS and karst rock formation in our part of the state that earned me the Sierra Club endorsement this year. I think that we are going to be wrestling with the problem of PFAS and forever chemicals in our water for the foreseeable future. They are hard to filter. My plan would be to provide grants to Wisconsin businesses and universities to come up with a way to be the nation's leader in reverse osmosis filtration and install reverse osmosis at every water pump station.
We are down to our last 2 questions. How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
My opponent has voted with the Republican leadership more than 90% of the time over the past 10 years. During those 10 years, we have not accepted Medicaid expansion, and people have died. Now, sometimes it's important to support the party, to put down your own doubts and go with what the majority thinks is the salient point, but sometimes not. And I think that a representative who agrees with a leadership vote more than 90% of the time may not be an actual representative, but just an echo of what's put forward.
Finally, let's say you're elected this fall and you get this magic wand you can use in the state capitol to resolve one issue in a way that brings all parties together. What would that issue be?
I think that's a bit of a pie-in-the-sky question. Our body politic is so divided. I've said before that we are like 2 nations on one continent, and we tend not to talk to each other. The thing that I would propose is that when the people aren't talking to each other, the leaders must. And so I would look forward to energetic conversation in the state capitol on some of these issues that divide us. We won't share values immediately, but we can share interests and build trust and come together again that way.
All right. Thank you, Scott Walker of Prairie to Chien, the Democratic candidate for the 49th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Scott Walker, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thank you very much.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.